Good afternoon or good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am here today with three very wonderful South African residents, and I'm glad that you're all here to join us as we get the chance to poke their brains and learn about what on earth is going on in South Africa, besides what we've been seeing on Twitter and everyone's own shit hot take on the internet. So I will let everyone introduce themselves for those of you who are not familiar, and we'll start off with Conscious Caracal.
Well, thank you, Prudentialist, for having me on your show. There's a lot to unpack and a lot to discuss, but luckily I've got two very, very smart, big brain colleagues here to add all the details that are necessary. So I'm Adams van Sale, or Conscious Caracal, and I work for AfriForum, the largest civil rights organization in the Southern Hemisphere, and I also do YouTube videos, and I discuss specifically the topics of community, culture, and everything related to that on that channel. And then a lot of your listeners might also recognize my username from Twitter.
Wonderful. Mr. Patriarch?
Yes, my name is Mr. Patriarch. I have the honor of being the token African American on the stream. I'm originally from Alaska, but I've been living in South Africa since marrying a local, and I've been here since 2017. I run a channel called Mr. Patriarch, where I deal with some sort of intellectual history, some current events, philosophy, culture, stuff like that. So that's
like we were joking. We said that Mr. Patriarch is like a Gentile marrying into a Jewish family.
Yeah, basically.
And last but not least, Rob.
So I started out with doing a bunch of like long form philosophical and political essays on WordPress. I was using WordPress, and now it's on Substack, and I'm on Twitter. I used to be under just like the pseudonym Marhobane, which is based on a nickname I got in college from someone, and then I just go under my own name now, so I'm Robert Daigen, and there's not much to say about that. I work with Adams van Sale in AfriForum. I've just started very recently, and I work in their research department. It's a big fat organization that does civil rights battles for the civil rights of minorities and non-minorities alike, actually, as it turns out. And they're part of a broader Afrikaner nationalist movement that sort of also is quite neighborly to a lot of the other ethnic groups in South Africa, and tries to look after the interests of everyone, with the primary focus on building the infrastructure for Afrikaners to continue their culture inside this sort of crumbling multicultural behemoth we call South Africa. Fun times.
Well, I think that gives us a good transition as to sort of the causes of what we've been seeing. For many of us online, a lot of us have seen the rioting and the looting. And I think it's a good question to ask is sort of like, what is the root cause? Because a lot of people will say either knowingly or unknowingly that it's either racial or mainly due to crumbling infrastructure or the arrests of Jacob Zuma. But what would be sort of, in your perspective, all three of you, the root cause?
Where do we start?
Yeah,
I think we just follow the original sequence. We'll just go Adams, Patriarch, Rob, and then we'll have got a regular rotation.
So I think the simplest answer is it's definitely not a coup. A lot of the rhetoric around what happened in last week in South Africa very much mirrors the type of media rhetoric you'd see around January 6th. So in regards to what happened in South Africa, it's not as mild as January 6th. Actually, tens of thousands of businesses in the KwaZulu-Natal alone were torched and looted, and billions and billions of rands of damage was done. But when it comes to the causes, there seems to be a lot of people with a lot of very how would I say it? A lot of very, very sure of themselves answers in terms of where it's from. But from my own perspective, from what I can see, is that so the mainstream explanation is that this was this Jacob Zuma, the ex-South African president, that's been sentenced to 15 months in prison for contempt of court last week. These are his supporters that are orchestrating everything, and there's like 12 masterminds behind it all. But if you look at the sheer extent of the chaos and the sheer extent of the damage, you'd have to have a massive and very well, almost inhumanly smart organization behind it to coordinate everything. So rather how I see it is that decades of ANC mismanagement and corruption has pretty much set the stage for these types of unrest. I mean, a lot of the more based analysts in South Africa have been warning about this ticking societal time bomb for more than a decade. In regards to, it's not a question of how, or a question of if, but a question of when. And what we're seeing here is pretty much a Olympic swimming pool filled with petrol, and the Jacob Zuma faction that started a lot of these riots is just a little match that was flicked into this Olympic swimming pool, and then it got completely out of control. So it's pretty much one of the most predictable things to ever happen in regards to South Africa. If you look at the fact that our unemployment rate sits at 32%, our youth unemployment rate sits at 70% or 75%, and our current Minister of Health during a pandemic has been put on special leave because he has very serious corruption allegations against him. If you look at the South Africa's issue of the lockdown, we had one of the strictest lockdown regulations in the world. We pioneered a lot of the draconian lockdown regulations that a lot of the other countries have later taken on. We banned alcohol, we banned cigarettes, we banned the sale of cooked chicken and T-shirts. We had very strict curfews. Nobody could go to the beach. I mean, the list goes on, and all the absurd policies that were enacted in regards to our lockdowns. It was pretty much the perfect storm in regards to the recipe that was followed. And when you throw just these types of ingredients together, the only thing that could have come out of that oven was definitely these types of riots. So it doesn't surprise me at all. I think a lot of people aren't really surprised, but I think there's also a lot of South Africans that have pretty much sobered up now. It's like that scenario where you're pretty drunk and then one of your friends, you get into some real trouble and then you sober up real quickly. And I think that happened with a lot of South Africans last week.
Yeah, I think Ernst, he's highlighting something here that I think a lot of people kind of in our spheres in America are missing with this, which is the sort of underlying preconditions of the riots and stuff. So yeah, I think there was certainly some political instigation for the thing, but trying to blame all this on just some sort of political action or on racial animus or something, I think is entirely misplaced. So certainly I think there was probably some kind of, political instigation maybe, but the seeds for it were already sown, based on kind of what Ernst was saying. So like he mentioned, we're talking about a country which has had many, hundreds even, violent protests per annum for years at this point. Violent protest is not an unusual thing. And also, usually it's directed towards unemployment or crappy government service delivery. So like, that your township isn't getting electricity or water or something like that. And on top of that, you have, as he said, youth unemployment rates over 60%, which is, mind-blowing. You have totally uneducated underclass of the population who is largely locked out of work because the labor laws make it such a risk to hire them in the first place in many cases. And yeah, and you have these lockdowns, and we just got locked down to level 4 again, which is, they shut down alcohol shops, restaurants, a bunch more restaurants and businesses are going under now as a result. And you just have this heaps and heaps of misery for that swaths of the country with no end in sight. And then you have maybe a handful of actors here or there sort of instigate these riots. And, the attitude of many of these people, I'm sure it was just, fuck it, basically. And they made out with the loot while they could. A lot of opportunism. So I think for a lot of people living here in South Africa, outside of the sort of comfy gated Constantia types maybe weren't all that surprised by what was happening, particularly given the socioeconomic condition of very large chunks of the country. And what we're seeing now, the way the government's spinning it is basically kind of conspiracy theory in service of the state. So by trying to pan it off on like, yeah, this was all the fault of the Zuma faction, or this was the fault of some sort of radicals or anarchists or something. All that sort of stuff is trying to deflect from the utter failures of the state since 1994, basically, and particularly with the Ramaphosa administration and locking everybody down and all that sort of stuff, and just making everything worse, actually. So, I'm not surprised by it. It's real nasty business, and some of this stuff was actually predicted by the Center for Risk Analysis. They were kind of leery of this sort of thing happening, and lo and behold, it did. So, yeah.
Yeah, no. I think one of the dimensions that I can't remember who mentioned it. I think it might have actually been The Economist, of all people, who usually are kind of cloth-eared when it comes to these issues. But sorry, I shouldn't be eating while I'm talking. They pointed out the moral dimension of it, which is kind of plain and hits you in the face once you notice it, which is if you have the ruling class who has absolutely no regard for any kind of morality, they steal billions, and you're kind of trying to scrape by. I mean, poverty in South Africa is real. It's not, American poverty. We had during the first big chunk of lockdown, we actually had children resorting to eating grass in order to not starve to death. It was that's the kind of shit we've got going on. And so you get to Durban, which is it's this big horrendous sort of thing, full of these absolutely enormous shanty towns and crumbling infrastructure and what have you, and huge unemployment. And I'm not surprised everyone went looting, but I think one of the big problems that we have here is that we've got this false dichotomy that I think is emerging, and this is where I differ from a lot of my colleagues and a lot of people in my circle. Is I actually think, as much as I despise the president and as much as I despise the government, I think that unfortunately there's an aspect of what they're doing which is correct. So they recognize the tactics that are being used by the rival faction within the ANC to destabilize the region as being the same ones that they used to destabilize the country under apartheid, to try and draw the government into negotiation with them for power. And they know that they were successful in doing it. And so they're actually quite legitimately afraid of this. But it is an extremely difficult business to unpick these two factions, because Jacob Zuma had enormous control over the state security apparatus. He had he had penetration in all kinds of branches of the government, and he still has people who are in the cabinet and very, very high-ranking members of the party. Like Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, his ex-wife, for example, who contradicted the president on a daily basis. What during the COVID sort of lockdown scenarios, he'd say one thing, she'd say another. Day to day, no one knew who was in command. And more recently, you've got the defense minister who's busy contradicting the president at every bloody turn. So, there's a great deal of sort of slipshod control of the executive. The one thing that I think it really scares me is that in trying to pursue the faction that actually shut down all of the transport routes, all of the attacked all of the depots, the fuel depots, the food depots, the water treatment stations, the power plants, all that, which is mostly, the former veterans of the so-called Veterans Association of Mkhonto Sizwe. I mean, these are often very young guys who are receiving military training. So the ANC had a perpetual armed wing that's continued, in
South Africa, we call them the born-free veterans.
Yeah. So these people, they've been looking for shit for a while, and they got to do it, and they got to execute an actual sort of military-scale operation. And like the government says, it's a coup, and so you have everyone, trying to get people to take this seriously requires having a long semantic battle over the definition of a coup, when, really, if you look at a lot of revolutions nationwide, they start with a period of destabilization. And I think these guys know this. I don't know if they have the tenacity or the organization to stick it out, but if they really wanted to seize the state, they'd only have to strike one more region in the country within the next 3 months, maybe Northwest Province or Lesotho, and it'll be all over, because we've got our military is absolutely stretched to capacity. I was reading in Defense Web, what's his name? Not Donaldson. Back at me, I can't remember the guy's name, but he was saying that, look, we've really reached to the most maximum of our capacity, because they're sending 25,000 troops allegedly to Durban. But he says that according to what he knows about the people that the government can actually afford to mobilize, it's like 17,000. So you're moving your entire sort of real capacity into one pocket of the country. And what's left is, the Western Cape. You've got Alan Winde trying to get the government to send troops down to the Western Cape to deal with a taxi war, if you can believe such a thing.
You're maybe gonna have to give some context there, Rob. I think our American listeners are thinking of like New York style taxis.
No.
Okay, so taxis in South Africa. What you call taxis, like with a regular cab, those are called specials. And what's usually called a taxi down here is
a Mexican minivan.
Yep,
basically.
a Mexican minivan with a big floppy chassis, crabbing its way down the road and spewing tons of smoke out the back end. And they will be in these cartels. And the current battle is between two different cartels here in the Cape over a route that is basically in my backyard here in my municipality, which is the Paarl Mboweni little corridor. And they're basically battling for supremacy over that little thing. And as a result, they're shooting each other in every part of the fucking province. And they're taking out... they're also taking out bus drivers because they consider public transport to be competition. So, the premier of the province, who I don't like at all, I'm going to say it as professionally as that. I don't like him. I don't agree with his positions on anything. And, he wants the president to pretty please come and send down some shiny new soldiers to help him out of the situation. The man doesn't know his... he doesn't know his ass from a hole in the ground. This is not going to solve the problem. He's not going to deal with it properly this way. This is a very messy situation that can't be solved with soldiers. This is police work. So we're at security stretched to the bloody limit. Economy is crumbling into nothing. I mean, the shutdown is a major disruption. I think the thing is that how to clean up the remainder of the faction that started the mess. The problem with that is that because they're everywhere, it'll basically require Cyril Ramaphosa to purge every single government department. And that requires him essentially to build a dictatorship. So what we're looking at is the more he actually deals with the problem realistically, and the more successful he is in doing so, the more he builds a dictatorship in South Africa. And this is not a good man. This is a man who, aside from all of the rumors of his personal foibles, which I can share at another time, this is a man who intends very firmly to bring about a Zimbabwe-style national democratic revolution. And it's getting to the point where, in order to maintain his patronage networks, he's going to have to. And so I think what we're looking at over here is a very, very dire situation where we either see the country torn apart in anarchy or dictatorship forming over the next year or two. Which
Not
is
a good
sort of
look.
grim. It's kind of grim.
I got a question for you, Rob.
Okay.
This is related to sort of one of my the video I made on the topic, and one of the things I said was kind of related to what you're talking about, where there's basically an an internal power struggle within the ANC, right? And what you saw with this riot, again, like I said, most of it was just sort of opportunism and a lot of desperate people and whatnot. But there was some sort of, I think, pretty clear political means, motive, and opportunity to get this thing kicked off. And the goal is to sort of, again, bring the government to sort of the negotiating table with the Zuma faction, if you want to call it that, to either sort of maintain their patronage networks, not have the rice bowls smashed, or whatever. But I think within the ANC, there's kind of sort of three wings. So you sort of have the looters, the sort of just the sort of opportunist, corrupt kleptocrats, and then you also have the sort of hardline National Democratic Revolution commie types. But I kind of think Ramaphosa he's sort of like that, but he's kind of more.
No, he's a blue commie. He's a globalist.
Yeah, that's kind of how I read him. I view him as.
Sorry, my signal ducked for a minute. Could you just ask me that again? Could you just repeat that section? Who are we talking about?
He's just explaining he's talking about the three factions and the looters and the looters just there for their monetary gain. The other faction that's there for ideological reasons, like the NDR and pretty much the radical Marxists, and then you also have the Ramaphosa fact, the new dawners, if you will. And I just told Mr. Patriarch, because he was looking for the word or how to describe Ramaphosa. I said, no, he's a blue commie. He's more of like a transatlantic type of guy. He hangs in those circles. Macron, he has Macron like on a private messaging app.
Right. Yeah. He's the Davos man, essentially. So he wants to sort of achieve sort of some of the means of the National Democratic Revolution, but without necessarily the sort of Soviet-style commanding heights, nationalize everything, own everything approach. And I think Cyril Ramaphosa is, in his mind, there's no need to sort of nationalize industry if you can make it do what you want it to do. Essentially, that's sort of how I sort of see Cyril Ramaphosa in this. So, what's your take, sort of, Rob? Is he? Because I think Cyril Ramaphosa, he does want some of the goals of the National Democratic Revolution, but his means are more sort of 21st century, I guess.
I guess that's probably accurate, but I think one has to remember that the ANC, when I talked to some of the sort of youth members when I was at university, the things that they were talking about emulating China and doing the fourth industrial revolution. So I don't think for them that there's any real sort of contradiction in borrowing the sort of governance strategies of the Atlantic system or the Chinese system. They don't see any contradiction there. And I look at it, Ramaphosa, and the way he deals with it, he's giving enormous concessions to China. And a lot of his members are talking about a lot of the fans and sort of MPs and whatever are looking to China a great deal. But then they're also looking to modern monetary theory, and they're looking to fourth industrial revolution type stuff. Great Reset. Bollocks comes out every day. A lot of global governance, open borders, Pan-Africanism. And the thing is that in between all of this, you've actually got all of the ingredients of the National Democratic Revolution, because both of these are socialist doctrines. One is a Fabian socialist, and the other one is a sort of is a Maoist socialist approach. And in the middle is the ANC, which is composed of the Communist Party, who are traditional Marxists with an African revolutionary tinge. And the broader base, they've gotten rid of the old UDF people. Those people went with most of those people went in the 90s. The rest of them went with Thabo Mbeki. And so all of your sort of like minority civil society type people who have still got a minor shred of decency are bloody gone ages ago.
Yeah, well, at the same time, you also have to take into account basically the tripartite alliance, the South African Communist Party, SARTU, and then pretty much the ANC.
Yeah, you should.
Yeah, because they've got this huge. Oh right, yeah, Because basically, okay, so the tripartite alliance is the African National Congress, the Communist Party, and the Congress of South African Trade Unions, or COSATU. And COSATU basically offers the ANC, it gives the ANC a monopoly on control of employment in key economic sectors. And what they do is they'll suppress protests according to whatever they need. I think the best example to illustrate how the tripartite alliance, how that part of the tripartite alliance plays out, is to look at the Marikana disaster, which is a massacre in 2012. Basically, the short story is you have Cyril Ramaphosa's union MUN, which he founded in the 1980s, and they are the official union representing workers at Lonmin, which is a platinum mine. Sort of Anglo-American involvement, but they have a big chunk of the company that they gave to some ANC-connected black economic empowerment people. So they get like 26% of their equity or whatever it was, because that's the standard rate, I think. And so in order to keep everything nice and balanced, they make sure that only the local tribes get hired, and then they get represented by MUN. And then MUN keeps everyone from causing trouble. But then the rock drill operators, and these are people, I mean, if you use rock drill, if you're a rock drill operator, you're dealing with this extremely heavy vibrating machine for hours every day. And these people have like arthritis by the time they're 40, 45, you know. So they were asking for sort of bigger remuneration and medical cover and things like that. And, MUN and Lonmin said, no. So they broke away, formed their own union called UMCU. And after terrorizing the community for a little while to recruit, they started striking. And Ramaphosa it's generally thought that he's behind it, because he gave word to sort of take care of the situation with extreme prejudice. And the response from the police was to use live rounds, which is something that was used only twice in riot control in the history of South Africa before now. Standard practice, even in the apartheid era, was to use rubber bullets, tear gas, So opening fire with live rounds, they killed 17, and then they hunted down another 17 and shot them at point blank range. Now, it's not unprovoked. These people had murdered police officers. But it's a pretty kind of serious issue. But you can immediately see how the system is kind of controlled. You've got black economic empowerment that gives equity to ANC members or ANC affiliates. You've got most of the unions in the country are controlled by the ruling party, and so the big private companies, because the margins on mining are getting lower and lower and lower. I mean, most of the profits posted the last couple of years are almost entirely due to mergers and acquisitions. There have been no new shafts sunk for fucking years, because labor costs are ridiculously high, regulations are ridiculous, taxation is ridiculous, transport is highly risky, insurance is expensive. It just piles on and on and on and on. And so basically, even though we've got some of the world's biggest mineral reserves, and there's been a massive commodities boom globally driven by China's strategic acquisitions program, we basically haven't profited from any of it. And what's happened under Ramaphosa is that he's been using the old sort of crony system of BEE in a similar way to the German National Socialist Party. In order to try and game international investment communities' confidences. So they want him to reform the economy, because the economy is a piece of shit. So he comes out with this idea of, oh no, I'll privatize the South African Airlines. But what he's done is he gave away a massive portion of this to something called Takatso Holdings, that turns out to be indirectly owned by a combination of the government and private party affiliated black economic empowerment figures.
Soviet-style privatization, basically.
More like Chinese. I think China and Germany, the mid-century Germany, those are good comparisons for that kind of government control structure. Is you do it indirectly. You give party control by giving it to cronies and friends and satellite organizations of the ruling party, and then you can say, oh, well, it's privatized,
Right.
and it keeps it out of the hands of any civil servants who might be a little bit too serious about rules and regulations. So
we're in a situation where it's pretty much that a tinderbox already existed and a match has been thrown upon it. And I mean, I'm seeing very much, the classic signs of just things falling apart. We've got a racial and political kickback system that's involved. I know that from my understanding that Jacob Zuma sort of really expanded that spoils and patron system that is now, like you had mentioned, Rob, just virtually ubiquitous across the country. And so I'm going to pull up a map here to share the screen, just the list of the provinces in the country, so we can kind of get an idea geographically of where everything's taking place. I do know that things have been more or less confined to one or two provinces.
All right, so the red, that little red province there is Gauteng. That's where I live.
Okay.
The purple province, or I'm very bad with colors. The one there down by the left is the Western Cape.
Yep.
That's where Rob lives, and also where Mr. Patriarch lives. And then that purple one on the eastern seaboard, that's KwaZulu-Natal. That's where Durban is. So the riots primarily happened in that little red province and the purple province there on the left, on the right. So the red province, Gauteng, is pretty much the engine of South Africa. The other provinces almost don't even compare in regards to the economic or concentration in Gauteng. Gauteng is where all the gold is. That's where Johannesburg is. That's where Pretoria is. That's the seat of economic power in this country. And then KwaZulu-Natal is interesting and important because the N3 highway runs from KwaZulu-Natal there in the east all the way to the economic heart of the country, which is appropriately red. And that highway was pretty much closed off. So the main economic artery of the entire country was pretty much closed off with these riots and with the looting. So the other interesting thing about Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal is Gauteng is pretty much just a mishmash of all the different cultures in South Africa, pretty much. The largest white population in the country also lives in that little speck because of the historical reasons. But the purple province there, KwaZulu-Natal, it's not one of the biggest economic provinces in the country, but it is very important because it has the largest port, one of the main ports in the country, in Durban, which pretty much opens the entire east or opens South Africa to the entire east, and that's India and China and whatever. So closing off those two provinces is pretty much ripping out the heart and then also another very important organ like the liver out of South Africa. And then you have to just think about what type of other results or shockwaves are down the pipeline. But also interesting is KwaZulu-Natal, as the name implies, is where the Zulus live. So they are the largest ethnic group or cultural group in South Africa. They're also a very proud nation, one of the few nations to ever defeat the British on South African soil. The other nation, of course, is my nation, the Afrikaners. And there's an interesting relationship between the two, but that's a completely different topic. So KwaZulu-Natal is important because it is also a Zulu concentration. It's pretty much the Zulu province, the Xhosa down there in the Eastern Cape. So why this is important is because, as Rob alluded to earlier, Jacob Zuma is a Zulu. And any of all his supporters and his power base is pretty much in that province. He helped get the Zulu support in that province for the ANC. That was why he was rewarded with his position in the early days. So KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng is interesting because firstly, Gauteng is this economic hub of the country, and KwaZulu-Natal is one of the main power nodes or cultural power nodes in the country. It's also one of the few provinces that are where there's just a little bit of a murmuring of independence. The other one would be the Western Cape down there. And the interesting thing about that is the fact that if you ask the question about who benefits, so in regards to from these riots, one of the main factions benefiting will be the ANC because they are losing support in KwaZulu-Natal. The Zulus are furiously, or very ferociously in love with the idea of self-determination. They don't like to be ruled over. They like to go where they want to go. They like to have their destiny in their own hands. They're one of the proudest nations in the country. And if you can ask anyone, the two dangers to the globalist agenda in South Africa is that the country be ruled by either Afrikaners or by Zulus. So the Zulus really scare the shit out of the Pan-Africanists, and they scare the shit out of the globalists. So they need to be pacified. So what's happening here, I think, as well, is when you have a province with this type of concentration of a very proud nation that don't shy away from talks about self-determination, and increasingly so. All you need is some chaos there, and then to roll in afterwards with your military to pretty much have a show of force there and to show them who's boss and tell them, well, you guys can clearly not handle the chaos. You can clearly not keep yourself safe. Don't worry, big brother South Africa, or the South African Empire is here, and you can see this through the imagery of the South African military driving into Durban with rooikat armored cars, which are not ideal for urban areas. They are designed for bush warfare. So that's completely just a show of force. Those rooikat, interestingly, rooikat means caracal. So. Those rooikat
for the American viewers, those rooikats are basically like the Stryker armored personnel carriers.
Yeah, they're not made for urban warfare. They're not made for crowd control. They are made for like serious bush warfare. So you can see by that move alone that this is absolutely just a show of force, and the timing of it is also not arbitrary. So they moved in a week late, 7 days after the riots started. The military does this show of force when the riots have already been brought to heel, mostly by communities organizing and pretty much keeping the tide at bay. But them going in at the very end, I think, also serves a very important purpose, because what it does is it creates this image of they know that the riots are going to be stopped by communities, and they're going to fizzle out and run out of energy and momentum as well. So what you do is you just move in at the last moment, and then it looks like you got everything under control. It's your presence. Correlation equals causation. Your presence there stopped everything. It's pretty much, if you look at some type of example to explain it, it's like the whole gay marriage debate in the US, where it was this whole movement before the Democrats swooped in, and they just swooped in at the very end to kind of claim the victory. Exactly the same, I think, is happening here. The ANC moving in, doing a show of force at the very end when it doesn't even make a difference in a province where it is absolutely crucial for them to do so.
So how popular is this Pan-African, political attitude in the country compared to this desire for self-determination, say, along with the Zulus in the Western Cape?
Well, I mean, I think I can answer that one. I mean, the big concentration of Pan-Africanism you'll find is in the university educated. So everyone who's part of the elite, everyone who's part of the civil service and so on, big concentrations of Pan-Africanists.
It's a luxury belief.
Yeah, it's a luxury
exactly
belief.
What it is.
Yeah, the working class, they don't like it at all. They tend to be very xenophobic. They don't like the other Africans coming down to them. Interestingly enough, they refer to the Africans from the rest of the continent as makwerekwere, which, much like the word barbarian, is a way of mocking what their language sounds like. Those who go gwere, 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 No, anyhow, they had the last time we had riots this big was xenophobic riot, and that was in 2008, and they burned several dozen foreigners to death in the streets, burned their shops down, looted them, so on and so forth. But I mean, what was different about these riots is that they weren't the people who were targeted to the degree that there was ethnic targeting, which I have to be sort of clear, wasn't actually always the case. A lot of it was directionless, but to the degree there was any targeting, it was against whites and Indians. And that did not go down well with the Indian community. And the reason that they've been so vicious in the way that they've gone back, and personally, in my perspective, justifiably so, deterrence is the best defense, is because about 70 years ago, 1949, they had a similar pogrom that went against Indian shopkeepers, and it was pretty aggressive. So there's a sort of like distant folk memory of this kind of stuff which hangs about. And I mean, Ramaphosa has not been very good at beating these people back at all. And I think the big reason is that he can't really afford another Marikana, So it's already a thing where a lot of the youth, a lot of people of our generation, they really hold Ramaphosa responsible. And a lot of people in Zuma's faction consider him to be a puppet of sort of Anglo-American forces. So English and Jewish tend to be the ones that the serious black nationalists will point fingers at. And they'll say that, okay, Ramaphosa is a puppet of these people, and so he has to be reined in or gotten rid of, or so on and so forth. And they point to Marikana and they say, okay, this is an example of white monopoly capital from the English world sort of invading our country and getting our people killed in order to steal its mineral wealth. And so that kind of narrative is not good for Ramaphosa. He really struggles to maintain hold of his coalitions as it is. And I think his most ardent supporters are actually amongst the white population, amongst the English-speaking left liberals.
Specifically in Cape Town.
Specifically in Cape Town. That's one of the things is there's as you can see on the map, the Western Cape, particularly Cape Town, is well away from the rest of South Africa, and it has.
I don't think you could be mathematically farther away. Look at how it's squeezed into the corner.
Yeah. Just barely.
Looks like it's trying to get away.
Yeah. It's trying to. The very earth cries for Cape independence. Yes.
Yeah. They're going to fortify Cape Point there, turn it into a fortress.
Yeah. But basically, the Western Cape has the distinction of being the only province which is not majority black. The largest ethno-racial group is actually the coloreds, and then it's blacks, and then whites, I think, make a little over 15%. So if you include whites and coloreds, you're looking at around 60% of the population, maybe more, is minority, in the national sense of the word. So themes also work better in the Western Cape in general in terms of service delivery and whatnot. The government, for the provincial government, for its problems, is at least capable in a certain sense. They'll try to fill your potholes. You don't have as many ridiculous power outbreaks and whatnot as you do in some other parts of South Africa. It's not as much of a shithole. No offense to Ernst up there in Pretoria. But so a lot of the sort of wide-eyed and bushy-tailed Rainbow Nation believers and whatnot seem to be sort of stuck here in the Western Cape. And it's because, to a certain extent, they're insulated from some of the goings-on further north. But I think that's changing. There are large, particularly outside of Cape Town, very large squatter camps, mostly from people from the Eastern Cape who are predominantly Xhosa. And they have been, have had their fair share of violent protests as well. I've seen them. They get pretty rowdy sometimes. But where the white liberals tend to live is well away from that. They don't see it. They don't go there. They don't go to the Cape Flats. They're up in the mountains. Yeah, they're in Rondebosch or Constantia, somewhere nice like that, and they don't got to worry about it. But this sort of violent protest action is very real across South Africa in general. And also, again, with talking about KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa has about 1.25 million Indians, and most of them are in Durban, which is the major port city in KwaZulu-Natal. And that's, again, where you saw a lot of the kind of the racial animus was particularly with that group, dealing with looters and whatnot. And one of my friends, my friend's mom is from Durban, and they were worried about basically being targeted for racial bases and for business bases during all these riots and stuff. And they tried to kidnap her daughters and rape them and stuff. There are people yelling outside that they're going to do that sort of shit. So I don't want to downplay that fact is that's a real thing. The diversity plus proximity plus grinding poverty plus lack of education plus all these things really does not necessarily make for happy-go-lucky kumbaya situations when things start blowing up. So, yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean this is the traditional. Look, anyone who's studied politics at university in undergrad, I think it's like by second year you will have come across this paper by I can't remember, it was Barry Posen or whatever his name was. He was doing something. He was talking about an ethnic security dilemma where. Looking at Yugoslavia, once the state retreats, everyone's got to defend themselves, but then defense looks the same as offense. Defensive and offensive capabilities look the same. And he said that also this applies to rhetoric. So if you're sort of saying a lot of hyper-nationalist things or sort of ethnic pride things and so on, that can look very scary to outsiders as well. And so you get this sort of cycle of, they're downplaying these negative aspects of their culture that touch on grievances, but with us and so on. So maybe they intend to do us harm and so forth. And this kind of thing spirals very quickly. If you're watching social media, it was they're killing us. Everyone was saying they're killing us, and everyone turned out to be right to some degree. So I mean. To just play to just play fair for a minute. I mean, some of the things that you get to see is one of the ones I saw was head of the local dance school, I don't know if it was ballet or something like that. Him and his family were driving around looking for a place to draw petrol. And they were driving past an Indian community at a particularly inopportune time. They got stopped and they got executed. I can understand why the overreaction occurred. You're in this horrible security dilemma, but when black people are complaining about sort of heavy-handed tactics and sort of violence and so on, they're not completely talking nonsense.
No,
no, and so I mean it is a pretty disparate situation, and the thing, fuck.
But there's another thing as well that's going to come from this. If you ask the question about who benefits, and that is if you take into account the fact that the ANC in South Africa, ironically enough, this year introduced legislation or proposed legislation where they want to ban getting a firearm for self-defense with the Firearms Control Act.
Yeah,
so this is very concerning if you take into account that we just saw communities defending themselves with their own privately and legally owned firearms. The thing is, what I think the ANC is going to do here, like I said, they don't let the ANC aren't good at a lot of things, but they are very good at capitalizing on a crisis. And they're definitely we're going to see these images of these communities defending themselves for a long while, like you Americans see all the images of the January coup or whatever.
Yeah.
They're going to use those images and say, look at these people that have all these weapons. They want to kill people. They want to wipe people out.
Vigilantes.
They're racist vigilantes and whatever. And they're going to use that as their justification. I can see it already in regards to this is why you shouldn't have a weapon, be able to own a firearm for self-defense. And the other thing is they also have another rhetorical or like a narrative ace up their sleeve, and that's the fact that they're going to look at these riots and they're going to use that imagery of all these looters, of all these people rioting, and they're going to say, this is what happens when you have an unequal society like South Africa. Now, ignore the fact for now that they created this society. Let's focus on the fact that they're talking to their supporters. And when their supporters hear them talk, they always think like, oh yeah, this apartheid created society. And they're going to point to those looters and say, this is a sign. We heard the signal loud and clear. We've waited long enough. We need some radical reforms right now. Now, we have a president in control that talks very much a lot about reforms. And the other day, he told the South African Communist Party that they need to push for socialism harder in South Africa. You can go look it up. And that's what he means by reforms. So what we're going to see here is definitely they're going to use this unrest as justification for pushing harder to get EWC, or expropriation without compensation, through, and also national health insurance and every other state centralized policy that they've tabled. This is going to be just like the 9/11 was used to justify like the Patriot Act and all these new security legislation. These riots are going to be used to justify all these welfare paternalistic policies, and it's going to happen very quickly and very soon.
So how quick?
You already see it emerging like that. That is exactly what you see in the newspapers now. It's like, this is the fault of inequality. We need to distribute resources.
That's the thing about South Africa. The government doesn't even have to really work on their propaganda. They've got a fully privatized propaganda PR wing in the mainstream or corporate media. So these are the types of oaks that when Cyril Ramaphosa, the current president, in 2018 said at a Bloomberg conference in New York that there are no murdering of farmers in South Africa, a blatant lie. The media didn't jump on it and say, no, that's false, fact check it. No, they came out and literally said, the headline said, what the president meant by there are no farm murders in South Africa. So he's got them. You want to talk about state capture? We're currently facing media capture.
We're very familiar
brown
with that
envelope journalism.
Very
call it brown envelope journalism. It was very interesting. One of the few remaining sort of decent outlets. I think if you want a total list of the outlets that are worth paying attention to for any kind of reasonable analysis or reporting, there's two investigative journalism outlets. That's Noseweek and Amabungane. Amabungane is headed by a guy called Sam Soul, really, really excellent investigative journalist. Sam Soul and his crew tend to keep their heads down and not say anything overtly political. They just focus on actually, well, here's a scandal, here's a crime going on, here's what's happening, here's the corruption. So it's very, very raw, but you get a very good impression of how things are working. The other guys that you want to look at are Politics Web, which is all the old sort of veteran.
James Mayberg.
James Mayberg is an incredible guy. There's this piece on there called... there's a series called Singapore Revisited, which gives you the origin of the doctrine of the National Democratic Revolution, which is essentially it was a Soviet sort of formulation of to generalize what happened in Indonesia when they kicked the Dutch out. You basically select an ethnicity, exclude them from the economy gradually, and then when they're completely at the point where they're destitute, you force them out at bayonet point. And I mean, look, this isn't exactly an original thing. I mean, this was what was done with the Jews in Germany, and it was done with the Indians in Uganda.
Before you continue, Rob, just maybe to help the audience out, Prudentialist, I've put James Mayberg's name and the publication's name in the chat. If you just can put that on screens for people to help them spell it.
Can do.
Yeah, and then the last one that's worth paying attention to, would be, I mean, aside from, this is the last English one. There's another decent Afrikaans one, which is Marula Media, but then you guys are going to have to use Google Translate.
Or just learn Afrikaans.
Just learn Afrikaans. It's a lekker easy language.
Just learn Afrikaans, bro.
It's bro, if you go onto Wikipedia, it's the first language they list in alternative articles. You can get a good start going. Kan ons eintlik miskien moet ons hierdie stream Afrikaanse stroom maak. So
Ja, wel dan
Wat
gaan
moet ek leer?
ek en jy gaan gesels. Ek weet nie hoe goed meneer Patriarch se of meneer Patriarch se Afrikaans is nie.
Ja, meneer Patriarch, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, the last one would be the Institute of Race Relations, and they're like a really old organization. They have two main outlets that are affiliated with them. One not so directly as much anymore, but anyway. So the one is the Daily Friend, and the tone is exactly what you expressed. They're sort of like they have it's a lot of hand-wringing liberalism, but they're actually very pragmatic in the way that they analyze things. They still sort of furtively hope for a united, sort of rainbow nation, but I think they are capable of recognizing reality. So they're sort of like, the Jordan Peterson sort of crowd, I would say, a little bit would be the one end of their spectrum, and then the other end of there would be, I don't know.
They're Steven Pinker liberals.
Yeah, they're somewhere between Steven Pinker and Jordan Peterson. That's their little spectrum. They're all liberals, at the end of the day. And they've got another outlet called the Center for Risk Analysis that does some more sort of in-depth stuff, although they pretend that they predict the future a lot more accurately than they do. I remember that Frans Cronje, when these riots kicked off, he's the head of that thing. He said, "Oh, we saw it coming and we told you so." But I remember reading that, and their prediction was like, "Oh, this will happen by like 2030 or something. That we'll reach the point that South Africa is falling apart." So they're not nearly as pessimistic as they need to be.
Yeah.
So
they also say the ANC is going to lose the next election in 2024, which I don't think.
I don't think so either. But I was going to ask you three.
I think they will. I think
Rob,
they'll miss the 50% mark, but they can make coalitions, which
Yeah, that's where I get scared.
Well, to ask you
And I
three,
think I
because
know
we
who.
mentioned gun control earlier, and that being a prominent topic, because I've seen all three of you on Twitter address, say, the gun-free South Africa account. In South Africa, what is the process of obtaining a firearm? How similar is it, I would say, to the United States?
Yeah, well, maybe I'll just quickly say that I'll keep my comments there brief. Firstly, Gun Free South Africa is a non-organization. I don't really even address them on Twitter, seeing as they're pretty much. Yeah, I know what you're going to say, Rob. I'll give you ample time for that. But yeah, in regards to getting your firearm, I'm currently in that smack dab in the middle of that process. I'm writing my competency exam on Saturday for a handgun and also for a hunting rifle and a shotgun. So and it's going to take a while. It's not the process itself that takes time or that's difficult. It's the long wait. So you go through the process and then you send it in to the police station and they have to send you your permit. But that can take up into between 6 months to 2 years. We saw pictures this year from one of those police stations where the firearm license applications are are stacked all the way to the roof, and it fills the entire room.
Yeah.
No, I don't think I'm going to complain about my 3-day wait ever again.
Yeah. No, I guess for kind of the international audience, I would say getting a gun in South Africa is easier than the UK, but not nearly as easy as the United States. So yeah, a friend of mine, he just got his gun, and I think he applied for his license at the end of 2020. So he's waited not quite a year, but a long ass time basically to get his gun. But yeah, it's not a cakewalk. It can be done. Basically, if you're tenacious enough and don't have a criminal background, I think most people could probably get one if they try, particularly if they, sought the counsel of, what is that one called, guys? Gideon Yobert's outfit.
GOSA.
Oh,
yeah, Gun Owners of South Africa. Yeah, they one of the big things they do is they're big on helping people, legally acquire firearms in South Africa. So if you want to get a gun in South Africa, they're the people to talk to, and they'll help you out.
Yeah, GOSA.
Yeah, I'll throw a link in the chat if anyone's interested.
But yeah, it's not a process of difficulty. It's a process of attrition.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Rob, you wanted to talk about gun-free essay for the next hour.
Oh yes. No. I just wanted to say just 2 points. They may seem like a nothing organization, but they actually drafted the they're pretty much responsible for drafting the legislation that chubby lass at the head of the organization drew most of it up. The gun control legislation, and they are funded by the guess who? Open Society Foundation.
I was going to say.
I wanted to say Soviet Union.
Soros? They actually are.
Yeah. So I just wanted to put those points on. You've got a lot of these kind of like nothing organizations that are like, who's heard of you? And then it turns out somehow they've got this massive pull with the government. Look, one of our constitutional institutions, what we call the Chapter 9 institutions, which are there to check for human rights and blah, blah, blah. The actual South African Human Rights Council, they are the head of that thing is actually on the board of the Open Society Foundation in New York. So, like, the level of capture by this Mugu in our country is absolutely off the charts. He helps people do land invasions in Cape Town through a couple of organizations, one of which is called Defuna Ukwazi. And it's all of it is like, little white socialists, usually from Cape Town, running organizations where they, help poor black people do all kinds of weird things. Not always constructive, often destructive. Yeah, man's got deep reach all over the bloody country. Don't know why. I don't know why this country in particular, but go figure.
Lord of the Rings.
So
Dark Lord's
I just thought. I just had So when Rob said we need to turn this into an Afrikaans stream, I just had the thought that Prudentialist, your username in Afrikaans translates to die omsigtige.
I would probably never be able to pronounce that.
I mostly just know colored slang, so don't bother me.
Jaspera.
Yeah, Jaspera.
So with all this being said, between the ANC, the Soros money, the rioting, the animus, I guess the question becomes then, like, looking ahead, for you three gentlemen, what do you see happening? Do you see more of just a state capture by, say, a foreign influx of cash? Do you say balkanization? What do you see happening?
I think, Mr. Patriarch, you can take the lead here.
No, I was
seeing as you're the outsider looking in, or well, the recent outsider looking in now in the middle of it.
Yeah. Okay. I was just going to suggest the old triangle, but yeah, we can start in the bottom left corner of the triangle. That works. So for me, God, what do I see for the future of South Africa? I think in this country, it's pretty hard to predict exactly what could happen. And the reason is there's a lot of factors at play here. So to sort of predict the future, I think, is kind of a fool's errand to a certain extent, because there's so many bad outcomes that could happen. So I guess the best situation is you just sort of prepare for the worst. So right now, what we're seeing in the ANC, Cyril Ramaphosa has said that sort of his main goal when he came into power is to sort of maintain the unity of the ANC because of all the different factions in it that we talked about. And the problem is he's sort of hamstrung a little bit, because if he goes too hard in one direction, he's going to piss off one faction and whatnot, and they could form a splinter group or seek to oust him or ally with another part of the ANC and get him out. And also there's the elections coming up, right? So the elections in 2024.
But there's also the municipal elections this year that the ANC now want to postpone.
Yeah, exactly. Postponing for COVID, of course. Yeah, you can bet there's fortification reasons for that, or just delaying the inevitable if they see losses in the future, which I expect they do. So I think what's probably likely going to happen is that the ANC is going to dip below 50%, quite likely, within this next election cycle. Another issue is that voter apathy in South Africa is quite high. So although the ANC got 50% of the vote in the last election, more people, I think, didn't vote than actually voted for the ANC. So the idea, I guess, it's weird in South African politics, because when the ANC becomes unpopular, it's not that people vote so much for the opposite party, they just don't vote at all. They're just like, well, they're not doing anything for me, so I'm not going to vote for them, and I don't see a reason to vote for the other guys. So I guess they missed that. They missed the memo on how that's supposed to work. But in any case, I think if the ANC does dip below 50%, they're quite likely to form a coalition government with the EFF, the Economic Freedom Fighters, who are basically a Black nationalist, Leninist, explicitly organization, which is sort of taken the radical steam in South Africa. And what the EFF does is very clever. So they sort of act as the bellwether for the ANC a little bit. So the EFF will get with a radical, highly dedicated, capable vanguard. We'll get a bunch of press attention and whatnot. They'll do sensationalism. They'll get everyone all riled up, and they'll push one issue really hard, like land expropriation or something. And they'll make it an issue, and then the ANC will step in and appear as moderates and try to, see it fulfilled. That's sort of the role.
It's pretty much a good cop, bad cop routine.
Yeah, exactly. So the ANC's always able to step in as the voice of reason with the EFF, but essentially they're making it happen. So there's a high possibility that the EFF will either form a coalition government with the ANC, or the other alternative is they just sort of get absorbed into the party wholesale, and Julius Malema gets given a deputy president position or something like that. I think that's quite likely. So political outcome for South Africa not looking good. That's sort of what I see for the next 10 years or so, maybe more. As far as what happens, there may be a situation where you basically get the Zimbabweification of South Africa, but I don't necessarily think that's going to happen. What I sort of expect is that things will putter along and keep being shitty, slowly get shittier and shittier, and people will basically live in like Western expats in third world countries in their own neighborhoods. Is sort of
they'll live in enclaves, and that's pretty much what I see for the future as well in regards to the people in South Africa are going to increasingly resemble those people defending their communities during the riots. It's going to become a lot more less dependent on the state. People are going to become more state-proof, and people are going to start pretty much just, as you say in Afrikaans, trek laar. So they create a lager, which is a defensive maneuver where you circle the wagons, and then you're safe inside. And a lot of people are going to start doing that. People are going to start fortifying their neighborhoods. More people are going to get their firearms licenses. More people are going to join neighborhood watches. We already have hundreds of neighborhood watches across the country, very well organized, specifically in the northern provinces. And they do a stellar job. I mean, AfriForum alone has 160 neighborhood watches across the country. And that's going to be the future, where people are going. And that doesn't mean that South Africa is going to become this dystopia. I mean, yes, there's going to be a lot of suffering, unfortunately, but there's still going to be a lot of opportunity, and there's going to be a lot of pioneers in regards to solutions. That's pretty much what I do for a living. Is I'm a solution. I work in the solution industry. I work for AfriForum, so we are working on and for the Solidariteit movement. So we're working on solutions for the future. Our slogan is "Bouwing te bly, building to stay." So that's pretty much what we're doing. We're doing parallelism while Americans are still theorizing about parallelism. We're building our own. We're building our own universities, building our own safety infrastructure, building our own parallel institutions, and it's going very well so far. Unfortunately, we're pressed for time, so we can't just sit on our hands, twiddling our thumbs and theorizing and debating. But we're getting a lot of stuff done, and it's very nice to see. And that's also why when people ask, why don't you just immigrate, bro? Well, I'm at the cutting edge of pioneering solutions, and it's giving me a lot of fulfillment and meaning in my life. And at the same time, I'm helping preserve my culture. So I'm following what we call in Afrikaans my roeping, or my calling. God put me here for a reason, and I'm glad I found that path.
Exactly.
No, I can say as a new recruit to this organization. Oh yeah, I was just going to say they are very impressive.
Yeah. No, they're doing great work. But I was just gonna my tie up is, I guess the real black pill for me on South Africa is sort of what's going to happen to all the, the people who aren't with it, the people who don't embrace parallelism, and especially the hordes and hordes of, the destitute out there. I think what's the future that's going to be in store for them is going to be really bad. So I don't expect, again, Zimbabwe level end scenario, but I do expect that the situation in South Africa outside of the enclaves is going to basically be large ganglands or just abject misery for a lot of people. But in some of the rural areas, they may be able to eke out, some sort of life doing agriculture or something. But yeah, it's not a pretty picture. Like, so if you're young and unemployed in South Africa, there's a good chance you may stay that way for the rest of your life, essentially.
Yeah,
Rob, you wanted to answer?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that particularly sort of stuck out to me about AfriForum is from I mean, like I'll tie it in a minute, but the big thing that stuck out to me was actually, funny enough, the other day you took me to see the Saltec campus, and the way that they were describing, in particular, the one thing that stood out to me was how the breadth of that core curriculum that they have for these technical sort of like technical manufacturing, electricals, electronics, proper diesel petrol mechanics, like everything is just extraordinarily comprehensive. But when they said when they were talking about the standards that they were sort of measuring themselves against,
just for context before we continue, Rob, for the people that don't know, this is the technical college that that the Solidarity movement built.
Yeah, basically they built a private technical college that basically has placed itself above the specifications for any other technical college in the country, and in fact, in many regards, it's above the standards that existed under the previous government, even. So,
and 100 million that went to its building, they funded through their members' donations.
Yeah, entirely donations from. I think what they do, because I remember the way that Kali Kriel was explaining to me their payment program is that they ask all of their members, like, okay, we need to fund this, which means all of you have to give us this much.
Yeah,
so
10 rand.
Okay, so for Saltec it was 10 rand. So will you all please give us 10 rand? 10 rand's not even $1. And they got this college built, and so it's very much like Hans Hermann Hoppe's sort of complete voluntary government by natural aristocrats. That's kind of the vibe that we're looking at over here, except amidst a sort of jungle tyranny. But the thing about the black community is that it's because it hasn't been shut out, and I think this will echo a lot of talking points that you'll hear from other AfriForum members, but Afrikaners were shut out of the old of the welfare state, more or less, and the standard of living to which white people were accustomed and expected is no longer achievable without serious diligent work. And so and if you fall out of the bottom as a white South African, it's not the same as falling out of the bottom as a black South African. If you have a memory of poverty being normal, it's easy to go back to. If you have no memory of that poverty being normal, it's like this sort of black ocean against which you tread water as hard as you bloody can. And the difference is that if you're black, you can eke out a sort of subsistence level on the occasional hustle and government handouts, which is enough to get by on the breadline. And that means that there's just enough of a safety net to actually take the wind out of everyone's sails. Whereas in the white community, there's a sort of very sincere fear of a real loss of family and community cohesion and well-being. It's much more profound.
Yeah, I would say in South Africa, quite paradoxically, even though we live in this, well, not paradoxically, but strangely enough, even though we live in this chaotic country that's very dangerous, we have a lot more community cohesion and identity than countries like the United States, a lot more based in that regard.
Yeah, I think part of it's due to, if you have, I mean, there are really only two struggles that are universal, I think, and that's the struggle against nature and the struggle against other men. And in South Africa, both of those are extremely palpable because you can see society crumbling in front of you. You see what it is to have logistic systems disrupted, to have the legal system not function, to have no security, to have water and electricity fail. So you're at the brink where you've still got access to those things, but because you can see that they're fragile, that struggle against nature that's been eternally human and is now hidden for much of the first world is not hidden from us, even if we still manage to create little first world enclaves here and there. And then the struggle against other human beings, that's something that everyone since World War II has sort of kind of been forced to forget. And that you can't really bury in South Africa. The racial tensions are too acute. And so that sort of presence of these two pressures actually forces any community that takes itself seriously to form some kind of solidarity. But for black people, because they have the government, as horrifically corrupt and predatory as it is, they have something. And because it's so totalizing, if you try and form movements outside of its permission, it really will crush you. For example, when there was a party called the African Transformation Movement, what happened is the ANC simply flooded them with members, called an AGM, and had them disbanded.
Rob, before you continue, just some context, because I see Prudentialist was kind enough to put the link there on the screen. That's the website for Friends of AfriForum. So AfriForum members that are South African. So in regards to supporting AfriForum, if you're from a foreign country, you can't become a member, but you can become a friend, which will also support us in that regard. So you can go to friendsofafriforum.com, or you can just Google Friends of AfriForum. And then there you can make a donation, and you can help build universities and based institutions in South Africa as well.
Very cool. Yeah.
And you can help pay Rob's salary.
And yours.
And mine.
Yeah. No,
so there you go, gents. Keep these men employed.
Yeah, it's
better than any super chat. Not on this channel, the super chats go to Prudentialist, but better than a super chat on my channel.
Yeah. Oh, that's good tea.
All my super chats go to my pills anyway.
Rob, how did you manage to make tea during a stream? Is it just there next to you?
No, I have a certain somebody who's been very, very kindly looking after me over here.
So, Prudentialist, do you have any other major topics that you wanted to cover?
I had a couple of questions that got sent to me that I figured I would throw my way or throw y'all's way. So I know Mr. Patriarch had responded to this on Twitter, but Academic Agent had sent a tweet out that he said he wondered what his South African colleagues had thought. So I'm going to read it out to you. This is from Dax Steven, who does a bunch of books and writings. He says, it's sad to see when InfoWars interviewed a woman from South Africa regarding the recent violence. The first thing that Owen did was launch into a narrative about how it didn't have to do with race, but the media whipping people into a frenzy, just like in the United States. And he was wondering what your thoughts were on that.
Sick. That's bullshit.
Well, there you go.
That's bullshit. I mean, fuck. I mean, it's such... it's such face level bullshit. There's nothing like you can't even begin. You had a coordinated military shutdown of core infrastructure that attracted mass violent looting by poor people that devolved into an ethnic security dilemma, and the rest is history. So now, he wants to say, "Oh, there's no racial dimension." Come on, man. I mean, the people who organized the shutdown, you know what they did? They deliberately tried to create a narrative for their guys to follow, that we are striking white businesses. That's what they did. Like this was part of it, because and they used the phrase "white monopoly capital," which is it's something from like an obscure Black American radical from like the 1950s or whatever. And yeah, it was used by a PR firm called Bell Pottinger, which the former president employed to create a counter narrative against the accusation that he was guilty of something called state capture, which basically was that he'd let these foreign businessmen called the Guptas take over huge swathes of the state, including actually nominating cabinet ministers, charging their weddings to the state budget, flying planes on the state's budget. It was complete nuts. They basically they lived like kings. And so they were accused. Their relationship with Zuma was indicted in the court of public opinion, and he got a PR firm and got several news outlets. Like they put together this ANN7 and a newspaper called The New Age, I think it was called, and they basically ran 24/7 Zuma faction propaganda. And their faction was called the Radical Economic Transformation faction, because they kept promising radical economic transformation, which of course never arrived. Transformation. Well, of course, but I maintain that like Zuma never really believed in any of this. The only point where his values really come to the fore is when you look at his strengthening of traditional institutions, the chieftaincies, the traditional medicine councils, all of that kind of stuff. He really was a traditional, serious, old-fashioned African traditionalist. Yep. He really was, but he didn't just reach out to the Zulu. He did this for all the traditional communities. He really sort of strengthened them as institutions and gave them powers and rights beyond what they'd ever had.
But then also to add to that, I might be reading the tone of the comment wrong, but there is also taking that type of stance to more of a right-wing identitarian or from an outside perspective, where you kind of lose the plot. And that is when you try to make sense of South Africa. So this is something I've emphasized also quite a bit. And that is, yes, race is a dividing line in South Africa, but it's also not the dividing line in regards to understanding the different factions and the different groups. For example, the Zuma faction within the ANC. This is a Zulu faction. This is a black faction within a black party. But you have why are they fighting each other with the racial identitarians? Say, well, there's a cultural element to it. And the same with English liberal Cape Townians and based Afrikaners, two completely different groups that view the world differently, and interpret the world differently, and that work out solutions differently. And the other thing is, which I think blinds a lot of Americans specifically to South Africa, is they look at South Africa and they see, for example, a dynamic of white, colored, Indian, and black. But that's very simplistic. What you're seeing is a white group that is filled with Greeks, Afrikaners, Anglos, Portuguese, the list goes on. And you've got a black group that's filled with Xhosas, Zulus, Chongas, Vendas, Sutus, Southern Sutus. There's 11 official languages.
Yeah. Let's not forget the colored community is still divided between English and Afrikaans and Christian and Muslim and Malay native, and then there's also proximity to whiteness and proximity to blackness. There's that whole thing of holy moly. One of the biggest ideas that you actually need to understand South Africa's racial politics is something called Biko blackness. Now, Steve Biko, famously, he started he was one of the, well, I wouldn't call him a formative member, because it was actually started by the Anglican Church, and I suspect it might have been an intel operation, much like, Yeah, okay. I'm not going to go into the conspiracy theory stuff yet. I think that's for another day. But basically, it started in the Anglican Church, and Biko was a prominent youth leader in the Black consciousness movement, and he hammered out a lot of their core ideas. He was a black. There's generally this idea that blackness is a political category that is created by opposition to whiteness. So you've got black people, colored people, and Indian people are black until they take the wrong political stance, and then they're merely non-white. And so that they've got this, and he had this idea that the African culture is the most human culture, and the white European culture is the sort of inhuman, unfeeling machine people who don't understand. They don't have the capacity for compassion or appreciation of music or dance or anything like that, and basically just selfish, isolated pod people. And and he said, well, okay, the colored and the Indian populations have some of the African humanity, but they can really only become fully human by joining the African culture. And so it's a kind of this racial supremacist, it's kind of a race supremacist position, but it's with like a permeable membrane. And it's a natural way that it's sort of understood is that you've got, much like in the Morogoro conference in 1968 for the ANC, they had a similar perspective in which white, colored, and Indian allies who are communist or what have you, they were allowed to be allies of the movement and members of their sort of ground forces and propaganda forces, but they weren't allowed to participate in leadership meetings. And so that's sort of like, so we're all black, but some are blacker than others, is very much a feature of our political category. And so you've got, in the colored community, there are people who insist that they are black. But the reality is that when the racial laws are applied, you've got this teacher called Glenn Sneyman, who's a colored teacher who, he has an activist background, but I can't remember what it is. And he marked himself on a black economic empowerment form for like an employment form as African, which is the category that means black on the official forms. The others are not. We are not considered Africans, you see, and neither are the colored. So he gets sued for cheating on his identity form. And this is a really interesting thing because it really advertises to a lot of people, and it's a very significant thing. It shows that there's a very hard line. You will never be one of us. You can fight for us, but you will never be one of us. That kind of perspective. And it's very fraught with weird dimensions. But Biko Black is a big thing at the universities. You get a lot of like colored and Indian people who call themselves black. And it's interesting, Chinese people are officially legally recognized as black, which means that they can benefit, their companies are statistically read as having BEE quotients met if they're employing Chinese people. And they get basically they get their own private special police forces who must learn Chinese.
Sounds like old Uncle G was cutting deals there.
Yeah, it's like it's just like the British. It's fantastic. When the British arrive in any African country, first they set up shop and then they demand special protections. And if you don't give them those special protections, they knock you over and get someone who will.
Yeah.
The bottom line is if you want to make sense of South Africa, looking at it through just a racial lens is not going to cut it, because you're going to see two black groups that despise each other and two white groups that don't work well together. Maybe even a white group that works better with one black group than another black group with another. So it's just going to be absolute chaos. As we say in Afrikaans, a kraai nest, a crow's nest of confusion if you just look at it through racial factions, because that's a little bit simplistic. For example, you just have to ask some of these, for example, some of these cultures don't even allow. Well, they used to be very strict on it, but now it's a bit loosened up. Don't even allow intermarrying between the cultures. Like there was a time where if you're a Zulu, you're not allowed to marry a Xhosa. It's and the other way around as well. Tswana is not allowed to marry a Zulu. And you need to understand these things in order to understand South Africa. Otherwise, you're going to see these dynamics, and it's going to break your brain.
Yeah, I remember someone saying there was an article long time ago when the Lava Jato scandal in Brazil was on the go, and The Economist ran this. Sorry, you got to keep abreast of globalist propaganda. So they ran they ran this article which opened saying that, here's the specialist on Brazil, and she says Brazil is not for beginners. And that always stuck in my head because every time I try and understand Brazil, it feels very sort of wild and jungly and multifaceted and complicated. And I get a very much the same picture when I think about a country like India. And I wonder, I always wonder if our own culture is like that for outsiders. Because
I just saw this comment. I just saw the comment in the chat. Christoph Smith says, "Just look at how well the Anglers and the Afrikaners get along."
Yeah.
Oh yeah, like 120 years ago. Never shall we forget.
Yeah. Now, I guess going back to just sort of Devin's tweet, again, sad to see when interviews, first thing Owen did launch into a narrative that it didn't have to do with race, but the media whipping people up in their frenzy. I think personally that the ideology of the people who sparked this sort of thing was, part of, again, what Rob was talking about, the Black consciousness stuff, Pan-Africanism, all this sort of thing played into, their ideology. There was also sort of targeted. Sorry, my kid's playing in the background. Can't be helped if you hear banging. But there was targeted attacks on, some Indians and whites and whatnot. But by and large, I don't think most of the rioting was racial in nature. And the reason for that is the sheer amount of, just non-discriminate chaos that sort of ensued. Like in Gauteng, I think. It might have been Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal, but of all the businesses that were burned down, and this includes, small things like spaza shops, convenience stores, whatever. I think the report I read was something like 70% of them were Black owned, essentially. So there was, and I think in Soweto, outside of Johannesburg, I think basically, which is basically 100% Black, for the American audience out there. I think basically all the malls in Soweto were burned down except for like one of them. There was a racial element to it. I'm not going to deny that with sort of the people involved in certain cases and whatnot. But I think, again, this was just sort of a tinderbox of all kinds of social issues going on, like the economic ones that we talked about and whatnot. So to just say this was sort of like kind of what you saw, back in 2009 with, xenophobic attacks, but targeted at white people or something, I think is definitely incorrect.
Mr. Patriarch, you say Gauteng with a harder G than me.
I'm overcompensating is the problem. I'm conscious of the
yes, dialectical hypercorrection.
Precisely.
Yeah, no, the problem with having a complicated country is I think the real mistake with South Africa is that because we have that whole white-black thing, because we have a Western constitution, because we are a colonial country, we look just enough like the West that people get confused and see their own political narratives on us.
Absolutely.
Which is, it's just enough to sort of fog the brain, but not enough, So it's very, very confusing.
Yeah. No, they assume like black, white race relations in the United States are exactly what they are in South Africa, and they're not.
And they also see Black South Africans as this monolith or like this conformed culture as the Black community in America is.
Right, which it is not at all. There's millions of people in South Africa who would pass as Black in the United States, the coloreds, but airy-fairy
wasn't it you,
university.
Mr. Patriarch? Wasn't it you that called the coloreds the South African Latinos?
Yeah. I called them the Mexicans of Africa. Yeah. And they kind of are. But on the ground, no colored basically really thinks of themselves as black. Outside of these sort of airy-fairy university centers and whatnot, they predominantly speak Afrikaans. In Cape Town, they may speak English as a first language. But even their African, the part of their ancestry which is African, is non-Bantu. They're predominantly Khoisan from the Western Cape, which were basically driven out of the rest of South Africa by the Bantus as they came south. So yeah, very, very different. So the idea that you can have like, oh, this guy has a large percentage of indigenous African culture in his bloodline plus European, but therefore he's black. That's not at all how it works here. And like Aaron said, even among the African, quote unquote proper African black Bantu tribes in South Africa, there is no monolith at all.
There's still like a 500-year blood feuds going on between certain black tribes in South Africa.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that shit is real deep.
Cultural blood feuds. But yeah, I saw a question here in chat. John Salvia asked, are the English in SA the most liberal? It depends on what breed of English. So you have the Eastern Cape English and you have the Cape Town Colonials. So the Cape Town Colonials are the guys that just ended up here for under very easy circumstances. I'm generalizing, and they pretty much just set up camp here and they live very luxurious lives. They even have cultural apartheid. They have their own little suburbs where they live in Constantia, Rondebosch, Bishop's Court. And then you have the Eastern Cape English, which are a completely different breed. They're like rural English. They are the type of breed that Mr. Patriarch's friends are. Reactionary Opinions. They are very rural.
They're like Rhodesians.
Yeah, they're like Rhodesians to a large extent, but you have to understand their history to understand why they are like that. So the Cape Town Colonials just came there because they had some business opportunities. They wanted to have a few generations long vacation in South Africa, while the Eastern Cape English were pretty much dumped there just to reinforce the frontier in 1820. They were pretty much lower middle class English that were, I'll keep it very short, that were not duped, but they were told that if they come to South Africa, they'll be given a piece of land and they'll live like lords and ladies and they'll be landowners. So they really wanted that. So a lot of accountants, lawyers, journalists, like these lower to middle class jobs, they all jumped on the boats to get this opportunity. So they came here, the 1820 settlers. And when they got here, they realized they've been duped into a one-way ticket to a frontier that's currently embroiled in a war, and they got dumped there on the coast. And there's minimal infrastructure. There's almost nothing. If you're an accountant, you're not going to get it. You're not going to have a job there. Much less a journalist. So they all reverted back, like instinctually, back to like the trades of like becoming blacksmiths and farmers and carpenters, and they started working with their hands again. They started these little towns like Georgetown and whatever. And what ended up is they became this very, very cohesive community of very community-minded people that get along very well with the Afrikaners, because they were also formed in the same crucible of suffering and unfairness. On the Dark Continent. So you had in the Eastern Cape, you have a very good relationship between those English there and the Afrikaners, but also between those English and the Xhosas, seeing as they all went out of their way to learn Xhosa and be able to speak to the Xhosa there. And they're very much salt of the earth type of people. If you ever are lucky enough to get a friend from the Eastern Cape that's an Eastern Cape rural Anglo, you'll never get a more loyal and principled friend.
Yeah. Much better than the English back in England, generally speaking.
Yeah, but I mean, it's cockweird. If you want to see where English culture really survives in South Africa, you actually look at some of the older private schools. Now, some of them have sort of undergone a lot of this sort of political transformation stuff, but in KwaZulu-Natal, you still see some of these schools where they can tell which school each other have come from based on their accent. Like you've got
like the different
versions
counties in England do the same.
Right, so you've got different versions of posh, elocuted English that get taught to the little grammar schools in rural KZN, and so they'll recognize which school they come from like that, and it's really mad. I mean, because the white English community is small enough in South Africa, very much the first thing you do when you meet another white English South African, you ask, "What school did you go to?" And then immediately, right, you're like this, and this. And, you'll know this person. Oh, right, okay. And then your parents must have done this. So this is how we map each other out, as we go, okay, well, which high school? I mean, for example, what's his name? Roman Kavanagh, who does a daily
Morning
YouTube
Shot.
news show. Yeah, he does Morning Shot. So him and I went to... Yeah, the first time we spoke to each other, he asked me, you get the usual question. I mean, he comes from French immigrant stock, but he is culturally an Anglo. At least in the South African sense of the word. He asked me what school I go to. St. Benedict's. And he goes, I was also at St. Benedict's. What year were you? And this is the first way you sort of suss someone out. Like, okay, where are you from? And they have the same boarding house culture. There's all kinds of weird rituals that get buried in all of these schools. Like the guy from Die Antwoord, he went to Parktown Boys High, as did my cousins, and they have like this weird thing where if you get caught wanking in the dormitories, they make you wear a white glove on your right hand for 2 weeks. So and then he grows up to be this weird musician who has this peculiar spiritual philosophy about not ejaculating. So I part of me wonders, did he ever have to wear the white glove?
Sounds like it.
Yeah, but maybe on a more serious note, I see there's a good question in the chat from Shrouded Hills who says, if you win the war, you force your language on the defeated. So why are you still speaking Afrikaans then? Well, that's because the Afrikaners, right after their religion, their language is their next most sacred institution.
Never say die.
Yeah, and the Afrikaans language has pretty much survived so many attempts by the empire to anglicize it that it has survived all of this. So in regards to that question, the English have tried numerous times to anglicize the Afrikaners, but they've always responded by very much to the bitter end, defending their language, building their own institutions. In South Africa, the Taalbeweging, the language movement, where Afrikaners got together to preserve their language from anglicization. And so even though the English would have benefited, they have always tried to anglicize the Afrikaners have always very staunchly defended their language and made sure that it survived. But now we're facing another threat again. And we are currently, I think, very fast approaching another Taalbeweging, another language movement.
Yeah, and also Afrikaans has the distinction, I think, of having the only monument in the world built to the language. Isn't that right? The Afrikaans...
the Taal Monument, the language monument, it's in Paul.
Yeah.
Well, with that being said, I'm going to move to some questions that were sent in the form of a super chat. I'm going to start with this first one here that I'm going to show on screen because I'm not familiar with the phrase that he has in quotations there. So from Judge Cagula Bushman for €5, and I'll let you all take a read at that.
How much is the new parallelism in South Africa?
I unfortunately don't know what he's talking about. Maybe Rob can enlighten us.
Well, look, the pillarization, that is the Zuilen system of the Netherlands. They've got basically this idea that, and look, I don't know it in the fine detail that one really ought to, that like an educated Dutchman would, but I know the basic outline. It's the idea that you've got all these different communities like the Protestants and the Catholics and, the liberals and the socialists and so on. And each of them sort of live in their own little pillar where they read their own newspapers, they go to their own schools. And so the Netherlands is actually a fairly variegated country. And, there was a time when a Dutch political theorist came up with this thing called consociationalism, where you give like ethnic block votes in a similar way, so that you have so that you give vetoes to different people and so on and so forth. And he tried to influence people who were interested in him tried to influence the South African constitutional process. It didn't work out. So the Dutch were very nearly an influence, but the attempt to do that, I think it does reflect a similar thing at the base, at sort of like at a superficial level. But in the Netherlands, there was a sort of consensus. Everyone agreed, okay, this is how we're going to do things. We live in our own little world. I don't bother you. You don't bother me. And we all vote for our own little factions in the parliament who will negotiate in our interest. And they were all sort of like roughly the same size, or at least within shouting distance of one another, so that they could all have a little voice. But yeah, that's not really the case in South Africa. It won't work because there's so many divisions that give where there are, like, for example, when you get to black nationalism, you've got such an enormously large force that it doesn't really end up working out that way. What it really is it's sort of, moles tunneling towards freedom is more a good way to look at it, is because as the tunnel collapses behind them.
Well, maybe seeing as Rob is I don't know, Mr. Patriarch, do you have an answer to that question? Because seeing as I'm unfamiliar with that concept, I'll answer one of the more tiny questions here, or just a remark that I saw here in the chat, but I'll give you the floor first.
No,
okay?
Man,
so,
I don't have anything to add.
Okay, so I saw Jonathan Paul said the separate development sounds close to parallelism. So I'm assuming you refer to apartheid, or the policy of separate development. The thing about separate development as the policy is that it's still a state-enforced separation. So the previous dispensation was state-enforced separation, and the current dispensation in South Africa post-94 is state-enforced integration. Both aren't morally sound. So parallelism in South Africa's context and what we're doing is pretty much voluntary community, where anyone can leave, but not necessarily anyone can join. But it doesn't mean that the state is now relegating you to a certain space and you need to go live there. It's pretty much communities organizing themselves voluntarily.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very big difference. But the thing is that I think one of the key differences between the Dutch polarization and what's happening here is that the Dutch never forced full integration and like a common central identity on the people. They allowed everyone to live in their own little sphere and to have these sort of vertically integrated communities within the country. And I mean, my friends are, So my friends over there, they'll grow. Yeah, sorry. Say it.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just saying in the comments related to this. Apparently, I think the guy who sent it, he said it's a theological concept from the NG Kerk. So from the Dutch Reformed.
Well, they wanted their own space to the Dutch Reformed Church wanted their own space to sort of give themselves something to hold on to, so that they wouldn't be influenced too much by the Catholics or by the liberals or whatever. And one of the biggest reformers in Dutch history was actually a very, very big time Dutch theologian, Abraham Kuypers, and he's also the origin of the Hamitic hypothesis as understood by Afrikaans clerics throughout the 20th century, which was used as a justification for the Baska principle, one of the elements of apartheid. I assume there are a fair few people who are listening who do know what the Hamitic hypothesis is, but generally speaking, what it means is that there's sons of Noah's Ham, Shem, Japhet. The Ham was I can't remember. Sorry, I haven't done this in Bible study since I was a little kid. But basically, Ham did something wrong, and he's now forced. Wasn't it? He saw his father naked, drunk.
Yeah.
And yes. And then he was forced to. He was dispossessed of his inheritance, and said that his descendants will serve his brothers for the rest of time. And so the idea was the idea for theologians like Kuipers was that basically black people were the descendants of Ham, and therefore they are theologically destined to be subservient to white people. I mean, the thing is that apartheid, people think of it as like this one monolithic thing, but it was actually several different modes of understanding how to manage the relationship between the races that got introduced as several different compromises. So you've got the Baaskap system, which I've just explained what the reasoning behind that. It's like the white nation. There was also an English version of this, which is called trusteeship, which is like the white man's burden stuff. Where we help.
It's a bit more diplomatically packaged.
Yeah. The English are very, very good at public relations, and so they'll sell you exactly the same idea and make it sound like very sugar coated. And
I'm pretty sure. I'm willing to bet it was an Englishman that came up with the phrase quantitative easing.
Oh my goodness! Almost without a doubt, we are printing money. No. We are introducing quantitative easing.
Just before we continue, because the Prudentialist is so humble in this regard, I think I'm just going to ask the chat: can we get the likes up to 100? I think our very, very good host here deserves it.
Yeah, and also Prudentialist, if you got to jet any. You feel free to impose your will upon us. And
I'm going to move now to the last bit of questions that came from the supers, and then I'll leave us off with something a little more lighthearted. So Blue Lambo, Black President, sends £5 and he asks, to the guests, are there any right-wing or non-leftist factions of Africans or blacks? Surely not all of them are on the same page as the ANC or the globalist factions inside the country.
See, this is exactly what we were talking about earlier about that racial lens in South Africa. So if you look at it through that type of lens, you will use terms like a black faction or a white faction, thinking that they are like white communists and black communists and based whites and liberal whites. But the cultural divide is going to give you a lot more insight into that. I mean, the Zulu nation or the Zulu culture is ridiculously based. If you really go into the traditions of their traditions, their values, and go looking in the more rural areas of it. In regards to the question specifically, maybe to answer it after laying that groundwork, you'll get different degrees of baseness and communist among all the different cultures in South Africa. So the thing is, there's also a urban and a rural divide. Almost all the cultures that have a very strong rural base are very based. And almost all the cultures that have mostly urbanized are very liberal or very leftist. It's more of the English whites in Cape Town that are more classically, or not classic, just liberal, and the critical race theory liberal, and then also the university class of black South Africans. But then you also get the Marxists and the commies, which are pretty much, you'd think that so the liberal theory or the foreign liberal theory always goes that the EFF are getting all their support from all these poor South Africans. That's why they get all their support from all these desperate South Africans. No, the large chunk of their support base comes from upper middle class and higher black South Africans that are supporting them. The intelligentsia class and the commentariat of this country are supporting them. And who was it that made this point? I think it was. I almost want to say it was Flip Base, but it's not. This is not my idea, and I can't remember exactly who it was that made the point that this is necessary for that class that I'm talking about. Is pretty much the class that was enriched by the government through pretty much what the Afrikaners did through apartheid in regards to solving the poor white question, was just putting so many Afrikaners into state employment that it raised the living standards and their incomes, and they became quite wealthy. The ANC is following the same model. Yeah, the ANC are following the same type of model where they're just employing a lot of people in an increasingly bloated state, and it's creating like a state-dependent class that's not dependent on handouts, but dependent on work and jobs and incomes from the state, because they have all these increasingly vast roster of bureaucratic jobs that they do, and they get paid very handsomely. So you've got this political class that are now middle and upper middle class and higher, that are going to university, sending their children to university, living in the most posh neighborhoods in the country. And they realize that if you don't have a party like the EFF that are distracting the majority of South Africans by saying, hey, look at Whitey, look at white monopoly capital, it's them that are keeping you down, that distracts from the fact that it is these people that have pretty much just capitalized on the ANC and capitalized on the faux revolution, and have absolutely no desire to help their fellow man in the country, or their fellow black South Africans. And once the masses find that out and they know this, there are a lot worse things in store for them than any white or Indian South African, and they know this very well.
I mean, it makes me think of it was funny when I noticed you remember that big scandal with Black Lives Matter, when it came out that basically all their leaders were just grifting cash off the movement and buying big fat houses in white communities. And everyone was so shocked by this and like, look, oh my God, can you imagine what a hypocrite they are? And part of me was like, yeah, but that's what they do, you know? I mean, like, if you look at, black nationalists in South Africa, the entire sort of like black power movement exists as a psychological envy reaction. And so what it results in is people who are obsessed with white people, and not in a sort of ethno-narcissistic way. And so there's no real sort of substance or community building aspect to it. It's all just, how do we get back at Whitey? And because of that, there's no building of culture. There's no sort of appreciation of the texture of everyday life for their communities or anything. It becomes a ruthless power game, and that attracts people who are completely psychopathic. And of course, you get people like this. The ANC is full of them. I don't think there's a single honest person in the entire movement or any of their adjacent organizations. They really it beggars belief, the kind of brazen theft and negligence. I still remember the comment that was made 15 years ago by what's his name, Charles Ngakula, who was then minister of was he minister of police or minister of safety and security? The portfolios change all the bloody time. Anyway. So he was the minister in charge of this, and he was getting grilled about the crime rates in the country, which were like, at the time, what was it, like 35 or whatever it was per 100,000. And he was being asked about this, and he says, "Yeah, you can gripe about the crime, but then you must leave. Like, if you don't like it, you must go." And I just thought about this, and you're like, this is like. It's halfway to it's very nearly civil war condition homicide levels, and he's just like, no, this is the way we live. If you don't like it, you can leave. I mean, the level of callousness that's required to utter a statement like that is it beggars belief. But that's just ordinary that's ordinary for a ruling party, really.
Yeah. No, I guess sort of on the wider question though, for rank and file people, as far as right-wingers sort of in black South Africa, I would say it sort of depends on what you mean by right-wing. So they definitely want South Africa for South Africans.
I mean, just maybe to add the Zulus literally have a monarch.
Yeah, they do. They have a literal monarch who has some real actual authority, probably more authority than a lot of European monarchs. No joke. But so yeah, they're very big on kind of closed borders and whatnot. They tend to have high in-group preference. They tend to not like, certain things like homosexuality and whatnot, regardless of, what the ANC says or whatever government policy is. But economically, they lean more socialist, unfortunately. So I guess you could think of them as sort of kind of nationalist, socialist, to a certain extent. I would say that's kind of your
social
run-of-the-mill-
democrats, but with social democrats with an extremely atavistic moral base, I would say.
Yeah.
Alrighty then.
Yeah.
Let me just scroll through these then, and we'll wrap up with something a little more lighthearted. Doomgoy sends $2. He says, "Greetings to the Dark Continent for all three of you."
Greetings, Doomgoy.
Hello.
And then Jedi Knight Anakin Cringewalker from AA Circles has decided to drop in. First one is for $5, and I'm not even going to try reading that with my Mickey Rooney Chinese accent. But yeah, just something along the lines of he is Blackanese, referring to Chinese being listed as blacks.
Oh my god, you guys should look up the anyone who's watching this, you should look up the Chinese MP that we have who rocks up, and in a few months she's an MP in the ANC. Like and wearing like an African style headdress in ANC colors and everything. It's extremely comical. It caused a lot of outrage.
I have to look that up now. That might just become the new thumbnail for this stream. But Cringewalker sends 2 more chats. He says, "When the Chinese take over the United States, turn up the Prudentialist and Charlemagne will have to protect the Midwest speak." Because we all sound the same, apparently. I just got a comment the other day that says I sound a lot like Kermit the Frog. I'm going to have to do that impression on stream one of these days. And then last but not least, Jedi Knight Anakin Cringewalker sends $5. Thank you so much. I never understood the Curse of Ham stuff, given that it was Kanan, not Ham, who got the curse.
Well, wasn't Cain's curse to wander the earth endlessly and never have any roots?
Ham's curse, as I recall, was to be subjugated and had to listen to Shem and Japheth, I think was the rule. So basically he was pegged down on the hierarchy and had to be subservient to his brothers.
Ooh, sad.
But then last but not least, I have a question for all three of you, because I was inspired on the time I was on Mr. Patriarch's stream a couple months ago. So I've got recently a new grill, and I was curious if either three of you fine gentlemen had a good recipe for how to make braai, since my American ass has no idea.
Okay. Here's where me and Adams differ, because
propane. Forget about the propane. You don't want propane.
Propane
maybe just for clarification,
is forbidden.
Maybe just for clarification, braai is not a dish; it's a verb.
Okay.
So braai is like you could very simplistically, it's the Afrikaans
it's like South African
barbecue.
barbecue is how it was explained to me.
Yeah.
Yes.
But at the same time, how do we differ, Rob?
Well, you like doing the whole wood braai thing, which is, but
yes.
my engineer father
return to tradition, Rob.
Yes, but my engineering father has sort of he likes his German Weber units and charcoal briquettes. So
no, that's sacrilege.
That's why when I make a braai, it comes on time and the meat is.
Mine's also on time.
I'll tell you how
I've mastered the art of the braai time, and at the same time, there's the saying in Afrikaans that goes, "Ons gaan nou braai." Means like we're gonna braai now. Don't worry, because some people take very long. But if you use the thing about a braai is you need to use African lumber. You can't just put some briquettes or coals in there. You have to make it from wood that you chop down here somewhere in South Africa, because it flavors the meat. It creates a very brilliant looking fire, and it wakes up something. It wakes up something primitive in you.
Yeah,
so you're telling me I need to get a PO
it.
box so you guys can send me some wood.
I appreciate it. Like when I was visiting, because I'm from the Cape, so like if you're gonna do a fancy wood braai, then it's like, oh, you're gonna use old vineyard branches, that's the vibe. But I went up to Aaron's, and some of the wood that he was putting on the fire, I'm looking at it, it's like this is like fine furniture wood. It's like incredibly dense.
It's called ironwood.
Yeah. Flipping ironwood. I mean,
it's very dense.
It's some of the densest wood on the bloody face of the earth, and it's incredible stuff. And it's just going to you got
coals for
burn your
days
food a little bit.
Yeah, no, I'm. When Rob visited me here in Pretoria, I wasn't gonna braai on some tacky stuff for him. I'm gonna embrace tradition and use the best the best.
But I
I
spent too much time in an Anglo environment, I think.
Because Prudentialist was asking specifics, I'm going to come in here with my my honorary colored status and give you a recipe. So what I tend to do is I like to go with I'm the fence sitter, so I'll use charcoal to get it started, but then I'll throw some wood on the top for that nice smoky flavor.
It's better than nothing.
And then
I'll allow it.
And then what I do is I take the night before I take lamb chops, okay, and then there's this thing that the coloreds like a lot called tikka. So and you baste your lamb chops in tikka marinade, all right, and then you grind a little bit of pepper on it, maybe a little bit of salt to your taste. And then I put on a bunch of lemon juice, let it sit overnight. And the lemon juice, the acid softens up the meat and prevents it from getting dry when you fry it. And then as you're braaiing it, I baste it with Jimmy sauce mixed with, again, a little bit of lemon juice and also
can't go wrong with Jimmy sauce.
Yeah, I baste it predominantly with Jimmy sauce as I'm cooking it.
Okay, so your in-laws are Jimmy's people, not Lappy's people. I see.
Yeah,
Jimmy's,
yeah.
And braai soaked, the one with the fish on it.
Yes.
Well, thankfully, I can buy Jimmy sauce in the States.
There you go.
But there's a lot of recipes you can try. The main thing is just it's more of the tradition of it or doing something. It's the communal aspect of it. You don't really braai alone. You always braai with other people. Yes. And the thing about if you want any cool recipes, we can always send you some stuff to try. There's a lot of very incredible South African recipes. Rob actually bought himself a South African recipe book when he was up here in Pretoria.
Oh yeah, it's really careful. Like
recipes.
Yeah, but it's not just like the recipes. Like they've got like little history lessons behind all the recipes, and like little bits of poetry and stuff that relate to their use and so on. So it's like a nice, fun, like textural thing. I mean, I like cooking quite a lot. The thing is that the one aspect that I think people forget when doing like cooking over a fire is that you actually have to get the coals low. You mustn't be seeing flames. It must be coals before you.
And the coals also need to be at a certain state, because if you just wait until exactly the coals, it's just coals, and you put on the meat, the fat's going to create flames again. So you have to wait for the coals to burn out a little bit and create like a little ash covering on it. But learning to braai is like an Afrikaner rite of passage.
No, it's a big deal, because I mean the thing is, I nearly lost my temper. There's a braai at a place in the Netherlands, and I'm sitting here. The guy's got like a Weber, but he's broken off the filter on the bottom, so like there's no air coming in through the bottom of this little Weber grill. And I'm trying to light the fire, and the guy hands me fire lighters that seem to be goddamn fireproof. Like they will not set on fire at all. I have no idea where he got them from. So I'm struggling, and I'm starting to twist newspaper. Yeah, so like I'm twisting newspaper together in this ventilation-free bowl that I'm supposed to be cooking a fire in. And while I'm doing this, some German comes up behind me and does the typical German thing, where he says, I think you might want to use the fire lighters, because you see it's easier to light a fire that way. I don't know if you've ever tried to barbecue before. And I nearly hit him in his goddamn face. Oh, I've never met a German who didn't talk down to me. I don't know why they're like that.
Condescension is the natural form for all Germans.
Prudentialist, when you visit me and Rob down in South Africa, and also Mr. Patriarch will be there as well, we'll have a nice braai for you.
I'm all for it.
Oh, lovely.
Lovely. Yes. Well, gentlemen, I thank you so much for your time. If you have anything that you would like to plug in or shill, now would be the time to do it.
Well, I'll show your channel again as always. I like the fact that we've reached 100 likes. Like I said, this guy is criminally undersubscribed. If we can't get the Prudentialist to like 100,000 subscribers before the end of the year, it will be a mission failed. So we're gonna see what we can do there. But yeah, thank you very much for the platform, Prudentialist. Thank you for the excellent chat. Thank you for being a good host, and thank you for bringing these minds together. I really enjoyed having the chat with my fellow panelists as well. And if anyone wants to follow me and they don't know about where to find me, they can find me on YouTube. There's a link in the description where you can search Conscious Caracal. You can find me on Twitter as well. If you just search Conscious Caracal, you'll find me there. And you can also support the organization that I work for, that's building universities and institutions and fighting for civil rights in South Africa, AfriForum. You can go to Friends of AfriForum to support us and also to help pay my and Rob's salaries. So I'll just put the link there in the chat again.
Awesome. Yeah, I guess for me, I have my YouTube channel, Mr. Patriarch. And I'm a little busy making videos this, I'm doing some work related training and stuff. So I'm not sure if I'll be able to make a video this week, but I usually try to put out 2 to 3 videos a week. My latest video is sort of on the happenings in South Africa. So if you want to sort of get kind of a rundown or share it with somebody who's kind of in the dark and wants to know very quickly kind of what's going on, you can share that with them. I also am working through a long Machiavelli series, which should be done, by the end of the year. I also have a series on fascism, and I do all sorts of stuff on culture and whatnot. So if you want to check that out, please do. I also have a stream on Friday with Yiz the Eunuch, I guess. And I don't have a AfriForum donations to help pay my salaries, but if you want to help pay my salary, you can become a donor on Subscribestar. So that'd be cool.
Yeah. You really should actually check out Mr. Patriarch stuff. His videos are really excellent, and Aaron's his interviews on South African culture are very nice and detailed, very good for getting solid insights. So I mean, I really do recommend you actually check them out. Myself, my content production is extremely sporadic. So I have a blog where I do these long form essays on South African politics, history, philosophy, odd, weird stuff sometimes, but mostly in the same wheelhouse as the stuff that we discuss here. Then I've also got like a few little videos that I made on what we call on South African history. I have a 6th video coming up, but I keep postponing finishing it. But so far, it's a 5-part series on South African history from the beginning till now, trying to explain how the power systems work and all the major players and so on and so forth. And then, so you can check that out. And I'm on Twitter. I'm on Twitter under my own name, Robert Duigan. That's Duigan, and the handle is @Marhobane, which is MARHOBANE. Yeah, that's how you do that. And then the dyslexia arises. Okay, so that's that. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen. For the audience, I'll have a video out tomorrow talking about this whole Turning Point USA and Brandy Love nonsense. It's more of a razor fist style rant, so you'll get to enjoy me use my angry tone of voice for the first time in forever.
Nice.
Nice. And then this Friday, I will have Subscribestar backer and subject matter expert Robert Freed. We'll be discussing Friday evening about Cuba. So I've had nothing but foreign affairs going on this channel for a while. And of course, I try to fulfill that niche of international affairs and geopolitics. So every Sunday, we talk about that on my Sunday show. So it'll be a good time. Thank you, gentlemen, so much for coming on. I greatly appreciate it. Their channel links are all in the description. You can find them all on Twitter. These gentlemen you should be following and listening to, not just for what's going on in South Africa, but all 3 of them have fantastic perspectives and experiences. So thank you guys so much. To the chat, take care, be prudent, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Bye.
Good night.